A scream ripped through the rain-soaked darkness, metal twisting against metal in a sound no human should ever hear. Marcus Chen slammed on his brakes, his heart already hammering before his mind could process what he was seeing. The sedan had flipped 3 times before coming to rest against the guardrail, steam hissing from its crushed hood, headlights flickering like dying stars. He was out of his truck before he could think, before he could remember all the reasons he should just keep driving, before he could remember that getting involved always cost him everything. His daughter's face flashed in his mind, 7 years old, waiting at home with Mrs. Patterson from next door because he couldn't afford real childcare, waiting for a father who was barely holding their lives together with duct tape and prayer. He should drive away. He should let someone else be the hero. Someone whose life wasn't already hanging by a thread, whose custody hearing wasn't in 3 weeks, whose ex-wife's lawyer wasn't circling like a shark who'd smelled blood in the water. But there was someone in that car, someone young. He could tell from the slight frame slumped against the deployed airbag. And Marcus Chen, for all his mistakes and failures, for all the ways life had beaten him down, had never been able to walk away from someone who needed help. The driver's side door was crushed inward, but the passenger door gave way after 2 hard yanks. The girl inside couldn't have been more than 17, blood trickling from a cut above her eyebrow, her breathing shallow and rapid, conscious but dazed, eyes struggling to focus. Hey, I've got you," Marcus said, his voice steadier than he felt. "What's your name?" "Emma," she whispered. The rain? I couldn't see. Emma, I need you to stay with me, okay? Can you move your legs?" She nodded, tried to shift, winced. "My phone. I need to call my dad. We'll call him, I promise. But first we need to get you out of here." "That smell? That's gasoline." Marcus's hands were already working, unbuckling her seatbelt, checking for obvious injuries. His Army medic training from 15 years ago kicked in, muscle memory overriding panic. "I'm going to lift you now. Tell me if anything hurts bad." She was lighter than he expected, or maybe adrenaline was making him stronger. He carried her away from the wreck, up the embankment, as another car finally pulled over, hazards flashing. The rain was coming down harder now, cold needles against his skin. "Someone call 911, he shouted. Emma was shaking, going into shock. Marcus shrugged out of his jacket, the only decent one he owned, the one he'd worn to his last job interview, and wrapped it around her shoulders. He sat beside her on the wet grass, keeping her talking, keeping her present. "Tell me about your dad," he said. "What's he like?" He's the best." Her teeth were chattering. "He's probably worried sick. I was supposed to be home an hour ago." "We'll get you home." "What's his name? We can try to reach him." James Morrison." She fumbled for her phone in her pocket, screen cracked but still glowing. "His number's—" Marcus took the phone, started to dial, and then he saw the background photo. The girl smiling, maybe a year younger, standing next to a man in front of a courthouse. The same courthouse where Marcus had stood 7 years ago, shaking, watching his entire world crumble. The same man who had stared at him across that courtroom with eyes full of disgust and judgment. The same man whose testimony had destroyed Marcus's career, his marriage, his life. James Morrison, the lieutenant who had ended him. Marcus's hand froze, the phone trembling against his palm. Of all the cars on all the roads in this godforsaken city, he had pulled James Morrison's daughter from a wreck. The universe had a sick sense of humor. "Do you know my dad?" Emma asked, seeing something in his face. We've met." Marcus's throat was tight. He could put the phone down. He could walk away right now, disappear before the ambulance came, before James Morrison showed up and saw him. The last thing he needed 3 weeks before his custody hearing was his name anywhere near the man who had testified that Marcus Chen was unstable, a danger to himself and others, unfit for duty and unfit for fatherhood. But Emma was looking at him with those trusting eyes, this kid who had no idea who he was or what her father had done to him. This kid who was hurt and scared and just wanted her dad. Marcus pressed dial. The phone rang twice. "Emma, baby, where are you? I've been calling." "This isn't Emma," Marcus said, his voice rough. My name is Marcus Chen. I'm with your daughter. There's been an accident on Highway 42 about 2 miles north of the Riverside exit. She's okay, but Marcus Chen? The voice went cold, sharp. 7 years dissolved in an instant. What the hell are you doing with my daughter? I pulled her from her car. It flipped. She's conscious, but she needs an ambulance. I've already... Stay away from her. Do you hear me? Stay the hell away from my daughter. The line went dead. Emma was staring at him. He knows you? It's complicated. Marcus handed her back the phone, stood up, putting distance between them. The ambulance sirens were getting closer. He should go. He should definitely go. But something made him stay. Maybe it was the army medic in him. Maybe it was the father in him, thinking about his own daughter, about what he'd want someone to do if it were her in that wreck. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the part of him that was so damn tired of running. The ambulance arrived first, paramedics swarming. Marcus gave them a quick rundown: apparent head trauma, possible whiplash, patient conscious and responsive, and then stepped back. He was walking toward his truck when a black SUV came screaming up the shoulder, tires spraying water. James Morrison burst out like a man possessed. He hadn't changed much. Maybe more gray in his hair, maybe a few more lines around his eyes. But that same intensity, that same barely controlled fury that Marcus remembered from 7 years ago. Morrison ran to his daughter, dropped to his knees beside the stretcher. "Emma, baby, are you okay?" "Dad, I'm fine. That man saved me. He pulled me out before. I know who he is." Morrison's eyes found Marcus across the flashing lights. For a long moment, they just stared at each other. 7 years of rage and resentment compressed into that single look. Then Morrison stood, said something to the paramedic, and started walking toward Marcus with that same deliberate stride he'd had in the courtroom. Marcus braced himself, hands loose at his sides, wondering if this was finally going to come to blows. Chen. The name was a curse in Morrison's mouth. "Lieutenant?" Marcus kept his voice level. "Your daughter's going to be fine. Minor injuries, but they should check for concussion. I've got to go." Wait. The words seemed to cost Morrison everything. He looked back at Emma being loaded into the ambulance, then at Marcus. Something was warring behind his eyes. Old hatred versus present reality. "What you did?" "Pulling her out. He couldn't finish. "I didn't do it for you," Marcus said quietly. "I did it because she's a kid who needed help, that's all. I know what I did to you. I know what my testimony..." Morrison's jaw clenched. "I thought I was doing the right thing. The investigation, the evidence, it all pointed... It was circumstantial. It was my word against a dead man's reputation, and you chose to believe the worst." The old anger flared hot and bitter in Marcus's chest. "Do you know what that did to my life? To my daughter's life? You were drunk on duty. A soldier died on your watch. I had 1 beer at lunch 3 hours before that training exercise. 1 beer. The autopsy showed Reynolds had a heart condition nobody knew about. But you stood up there and made it sound like I was an alcoholic who got someone killed through negligence?" Marcus's voice cracked. "My wife left me. I lost my career. I've been fighting for 3 years just to see my own daughter more than twice a month." Morrison flinched. "I had to report what I saw. You reported your interpretation, your assumptions." Marcus shook his head. "But none of that matters now. Your daughter's safe. That's all that counts." He turned to go, but Morrison grabbed his arm. "Wait, please." There was something different in his voice now. Something broken. "What?" Marcus pulled free. "I need to know that car. The way it was crushed. If you hadn't stopped..." Morrison swallowed hard. "The gas leak. How bad was it?" Marcus looked at him. Really looked at him. And saw past the lieutenant, past the man who had destroyed his life, to the father standing there. The father who was realizing just how close he'd come to losing everything. "Bad enough," Marcus said softly. "Another few minutes, maybe?" Morrison's face went white. Oh God, if she'd been..." He sat down hard on the wet guardrail, put his head in his hands. His whole body was shaking, and despite everything, despite all the rage and resentment and justified hatred, Marcus couldn't walk away. He sat down next to the man who had ruined his life and waited while he fell apart. I don't know what to say, Morrison finally managed. Thank you it's not enough. Not even close. She's your daughter. I'd hoped someone would do the same for mine. Morrison looked up sharply. You have a daughter? Sophie, she's 7. Marcus pulled out his phone, showed him the lock screen photo. A little girl with pigtails, gap-toothed smile, holding up a crayon drawing. I see her every other weekend if I'm lucky. If your testimony doesn't mess up my custody hearing in 3 weeks. The words hung there between them, heavy and sharp. I'll testify, Morrison said suddenly. What? At your hearing, I'll testify. Morrison stood, squared his shoulders like he was back in uniform. I'll tell them I was wrong, that I let my assumptions cloud my judgment, that you're not the man I made you out to be. I'll tell them. I'll tell them what you did tonight, that you saved my daughter's life even though I destroyed yours. Marcus stared at him. Why? Because it's the truth. Because I owe you more than I can ever repay. Because… Morrison's voice broke. Because if Emma had died in that car while I was at home being angry about her being late, if I'd lost her and never got to tell her I love her one more time… He couldn't finish. I need to think about it. Marcus's head was spinning. 7 years he'd dreamed of James Morrison admitting he was wrong. 7 years of fantasizing about vindication. And now that it was being offered, he didn't know what to do with it. I understand. Here. Morrison pulled out a business card scribbled on the back. My personal cell? Call me, even if it's just to yell at me. I deserve it. The paramedic called over. Lieutenant Morrison, we're taking your daughter to St. Mary's. You can ride with us. Morrison nodded, started to go, then turned back. Chen, tonight, what you did. You didn't just save my daughter. You saved me too. Marcus watched him go, the card heavy in his hand. His phone rang. Mrs. Patterson, wondering when he'd be home. On my way, he said, exhaustion suddenly crashing over him. Tell Sophie Daddy's coming. The drive home was a blur. His mind kept replaying the moment he'd recognized Morrison in that photo, the moment he could have walked away. Should have walked away. His lawyer would kill him for getting involved with Morrison 3 weeks before the hearing. His ex-wife's lawyer would have a field day with it. But when he pulled into his driveway and saw Sophie's face pressed against the window, waiting for him, none of that mattered. He'd done the right thing. For once in 7 years, he'd done something he could be proud of. Mrs. Patterson met him at the door. Everything okay? You look like you've been through the wars. Something like that. He paid her, probably more than he could afford, and watched her drive away. Then Sophie was in his arms, small and warm and smelling like her bubblegum shampoo. You're all wet, Daddy. Had to help someone tonight, baby girl. Remind me to tell you about it when you're older. Was it exciting? Maybe too exciting. He carried her to bed, tucked her in, read her the same story he'd read 100 times. Normal, precious. Normal. But as he lay in his own bed hours later, unable to sleep, his mind kept returning to Morrison's face. The desperation, the gratitude, the shame. 7 years of imagining that moment, and now that it had come, Marcus felt empty. Tired. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Emma's going to be fine. Concussion, some bruised ribs, but fine. I keep thinking about what you said about Sophie. About the hearing, I meant what I said tonight. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. You saved my daughter's life. Let me help save yours. M. Marcus stared at the message for a long time. Trust didn't come easy. Not after everything, but maybe Morrison meant it. Maybe people could change. Maybe 7 years was long enough to carry all this anger. He typed back slowly. Hearing is May 15th, 10 a.m. County Courthouse. Family Court, Judge Patterson. If you're serious, I could use a character witness. The response came almost immediately. I'll be there. And Chen? I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I am truly sorry. Marcus set the phone down, closed his eyes. Sorry didn't give him back his career. Sorry didn't give him back 7 years with his daughter. Sorry didn't erase the nights he'd spent wondering if he'd ever stop being angry, ever stop feeling like a failure. But sorry was a start. The next 3 weeks moved in slow motion. Marcus threw himself into work. He'd finally landed a decent job doing safety consulting for construction sites, using his military experience in a way that didn't require anyone to trust him with authority. He called the number Morrison gave him twice, and twice got voicemail, left messages that were awkward and stilted, not sure what to say to the man who was either his salvation or his biggest mistake. Then, 4 days before the hearing, Morrison called back. "Can we meet? I want to talk through what I'll say on the stand. Make sure it helps." They met at a coffee shop halfway between their homes, neutral territory. Morrison looked older than he had that night in the rain, the weight of command sitting heavy on his shoulders. He brought a folder, spread papers across the table between them. "I've been doing my homework," he said. "The original investigation into Reynolds' death, the autopsy report. The timeline." He looked up, met Marcus's eyes. "You were telling the truth, all of it. The beer was logged hours before the exercise. Reynolds' heart condition was in his medical history, but it had been filed wrong, never flagged. The investigating officer, he had it out for you because of some personal beef from your time in Kandahar." "I know all this," Marcus said tiredly. "I've known it for 7 years. But I didn't. I took their word for it. I saw you grieving, saw you angry, and I assumed guilt." Morrison's hands clenched around his coffee cup. "I let my own prejudices fill in the gaps, and I'm sorry doesn't cover it, but it's all I have." "Why?" Marcus asked. "Why did you assume the worst about me?" Morrison was quiet for a long time. "My brother, he was killed by a drunk driver when I was 20. The guy had been drinking on his lunch break, thought he was fine to drive. I've spent my whole career with zero tolerance for alcohol and duty, for anyone who takes those risks." He met Marcus's eyes. "You reminded me of that driver. Same casual attitude about having had a drink, same defensiveness. And I made you pay for something that wasn't your fault because I never got to make him pay." The honesty of it was staggering. Marcus sat back, absorbing it. "That's messed up." "I know." Morrison rubbed his face. "I've been in therapy the past year, trying to work through it. Emma's mother left us, said I was too controlled, too rigid, said I couldn't see people as they really were, only as the boxes I put them in. She was right." He pushed the folder across to Marcus. "This is everything. Copies of the reports, my written statement of error, character references from your old unit mates that I tracked down. Use whatever helps." Marcus flipped through the pages, saw names he hadn't thought about in years. Guys he'd served with, guys who'd disappeared after his discharge because associating with him was career suicide. Morrison had found them, convinced them to write statements. "How did you—" "I called in favors, used my rank, told them the truth, that I'd made a mistake and a good man had paid for it." Morrison leaned forward. "Chen, I can't give you back what you lost, but I can try to make sure you don't lose anymore." The hearing was on a Tuesday. Marcus put on his one good suit, kissed Sophie goodbye. She was staying with Mrs. Patterson, too young to be dragged into court, and drove to the courthouse with his hands white-knuckled on the wheel. His lawyer, a public defender who looked fresh out of law school, met him on the steps. "Your ex's lawyer is going to come at you hard," she warned. "They're going to bring up the discharge, the investigation, everything. Are you sure this Morrison guy is going to show?" "He'll show." Marcus said it with more confidence than he felt. The courtroom was smaller than he remembered, more intimate. His ex-wife, Jennifer, sat at the other table with her lawyer and her new husband. She didn't look at him. They hadn't spoken in 2 years, not since she'd remarried and filed to reduce his custody rights even further. Judge Patterson was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who'd been through this same dance 1,000 times. "Mr. Chen, you're petitioning for increased custody of your daughter, Sophie, correct?" "Yes, Your Honor, joint custody, week on, week off." Jennifer's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, my client objects to this petition on the grounds that Mr. Chen has a history of instability, including a dishonorable discharge from the military following an incident that resulted in the death of a fellow soldier." "It was a medical discharge," Marcus's lawyer interjected, but her voice lacked conviction. "Due to circumstances arising from his negligence?" The courtroom door opened. James Morrison walked in, full dress uniform, medals gleaming. Every eye turned to him. "I apologize for the interruption, Your Honor," Morrison said, his command voice filling the room. "Lieutenant James Morrison, U.S. Army. I'm here to testify on behalf of Mr. Chen." Jennifer's lawyer looked like someone had punched him. "Objection, Your Honor. Lieutenant Morrison was the primary witness in the investigation that led to Mr. Chen's discharge. His testimony is the foundation of our argument regarding Mr. Chen's character, which is exactly why I'm here," Morrison said, moving to the witness stand without being asked. The bailiff swore him in automatically, caught in the gravitational pull of Morrison's presence. Judge Patterson looked intrigued. "Lieutenant Morrison, you have something to add to these proceedings?" "I have a confession to make, Your Honor, and a correction." Morrison straightened in his chair, every inch the military officer. 7 years ago, I gave testimony in an investigation that led to Mr. Chen's discharge. I stated that I believed him to be negligent in his duties and partially responsible for the death of Private First Class David Reynolds. I was wrong. The courtroom went silent. In the years since, new evidence has come to light. Private Reynolds died from a previously undiagnosed heart condition during a routine training exercise. Mr. Chen was not drunk or impaired. He had consumed a single beer hours before the exercise, well within regulations. The investigation was flawed from the start, and my testimony was based on incomplete information and personal bias. Morrison looked directly at Marcus. I let my own trauma color my judgment. I saw what I expected to see, not what was actually there, and Marcus Chen paid the price for my failure. "This is highly irregular," Jennifer's lawyer protested. "This is the truth," Morrison said flatly. 3 weeks ago, I got a phone call that my daughter had been in a serious car accident. When I arrived at the scene, I found her alive because a stranger had pulled her from a burning vehicle and stayed with her until help arrived. That stranger was Marcus Chen. His voice roughened. He saved my daughter's life despite knowing who I was. Despite everything I'd done to him. He chose to be the kind of man I'd failed to be. Someone who does the right thing, regardless of personal cost. Judge Patterson leaned forward. "You're saying you believe Mr. Chen is fit to have custody of his daughter? I'm saying he's exactly the kind of father every child deserves. Brave, selfless, compassionate. The kind who risks himself for others. The kind who shows up, who keeps fighting, who doesn't give up even when the whole world is against him." Morrison's jaw tightened. I destroyed this man's life based on a lie I told myself. The least I can do is tell the truth now. When Morrison stepped down, Marcus could barely see through the blur in his eyes. His lawyer was whispering urgently to him, but he couldn't hear the words over the roaring in his ears. The judge called a brief recess. Jennifer's lawyer tried to recover, calling character witnesses who spoke about Marcus's struggles, his job instability, his tiny apartment. But it all sounded hollow after Morrison's testimony. When the judge returned, her expression was unreadable. "Mr. Chen, I've reviewed all the evidence presented today. I've listened to the testimony, and I'm prepared to make my ruling." Marcus held his breath. "Joint custody, alternating weeks, effective immediately. Mr. Chen, you'll have Sophie for the summer months and alternating holidays." The gavel came down. This court is adjourned. The world tilted. Marcus sat there, frozen, until his lawyer pulled him to his feet, babbling about what came next. Jennifer and her husband left without a word, her face tight with anger. But Marcus barely noticed. He stumbled out into the hallway, leaned against the wall, and just breathed. Morrison found him there. They looked at each other for a long moment. "I don't know how to thank you," Marcus finally said. "You already did. The night you pulled Emma from that car." Morrison held out his hand. "I'm hoping maybe we could start over. Not forget what happened, but move past it." Marcus looked at the offered hand. 7 years of anger. 7 years of bitterness. But also 3 weeks of slow, painful rebuilding. Of learning that people were more than their worst moments. That forgiveness didn't mean forgetting, but it did mean choosing something other than rage. He took Morrison's hand. "My daughter really likes ice cream. There's a place near my apartment. Maybe Emma would like to meet Sophie sometime?" Morrison's eyes lit up. Emma's been talking about the hero who saved her nonstop. She'd love that. 2 months later, on a sticky August evening, Marcus and Morrison sat on a park bench watching their daughters chase fireflies across the grass. Emma was patient with Sophie, showing her how to cup her hands gently to catch the insects without hurting them. Sophie's laughter rang out clear and bright. "She's good with kids," Marcus observed. "Gets it from her mother," Morrison said quietly. Then, "I tracked her down. My ex told her about what happened about you. She said she was proud of me for owning my mistakes." He laughed bitterly. "Only took me destroying someone's life to learn that lesson." "You're here now," Marcus said. "That's what matters." "Emma asked me the other day what makes someone a hero." Morrison watched his daughter spin Sophie in a circle, both of them giggling. "I told her it's not about being perfect. It's about choosing to do the hard thing when it matters most. Choosing kindness when you've been given every reason to be cruel." "That's a good answer." "I was talking about you, you know." Marcus shook his head. "I just did what anyone would do." "No, you did what the best of us would do." "There's a difference." Morrison stood as the girls came running over, out of breath and glowing. "Hey, who wants pizza?" "Me! Me!" Sophie jumped up and down. "Can Mr. Chen come?" Emma asked. Morrison smiled. "He's already invited." They walked to the pizza place together, 2 men and 2 girls, their shadows long in the evening light. Strangers might have seen just a normal family outing. They wouldn't have known about the wreckage they'd started from, the long road of healing still ahead. But Marcus knew, and as Sophie slipped her small hand into his, chattering about fireflies and summer and her new friend Emma, he felt something shift in his chest. Something light, something like hope. "Dad?" Sophie tugged his hand. "Why are you crying?" "Happy tears, baby girl." He picked her up, held her close. "Just happy tears." Across the table, Morrison caught his eye and nodded. They both knew the truth, that forgiveness was messy and complicated, that some wounds never fully healed, that trust had to be rebuilt one small moment at a time. But they also knew that sometimes, in the wreckage of our worst moments, we find the chance to become better than we were. And sometimes, the face you never wanted to see again becomes the face that saves your life. As the evening wore on, pizzas consumed and stories shared, Marcus realized something else. For 7 years, he'd been waiting for justice, for vindication, for someone to admit he'd been wronged. But justice, when it finally came, looked nothing like he'd imagined. It wasn't bitter victory or sweet revenge. It was 2 little girls laughing over a shared joke. It was a man humbling himself to right an old wrong. It was the slow, painful, beautiful work of building something new from the rubble of the past. Outside the restaurant window, fireflies still danced in the deepening dark, tiny lights refusing to give up on the night.